The sky was a deep shade of gray, the kind that makes the world feel heavier, as if the air itself was thick with sorrow. A little girl, no more than 7, clung to her mother's hand, her tiny fingers wrapped tightly around it. Her big round eyes were filled with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't far from it either. There was a kind of urgency in them, a pleading, desperate need. "Please, Mama," she whispered, tugging at her mother's arm. "Can we go see Papa today?" Her mother hesitated. She wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. Visiting his grave was never easy, not for her, and certainly not for her daughter. But how could she say no when those innocent eyes were begging her so earnestly? With a heavy sigh, she nodded. "All right, sweetheart, let's go." The drive to the cemetery was quiet. The radio played soft static in the background, but neither of them paid attention. The mother kept her eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. The little girl sat in the back seat, staring out the window, lost in thoughts too big for someone so small. When they arrived, the mother took her daughter's hand again, leading her through the rows of tombstones. The air was still, except for the occasional rustle of dry leaves beneath their feet. The little girl walked with purpose, as if she knew exactly where she was going. And maybe she did. They reached his grave, a simple headstone with his name etched into it. The mother felt her breath hitch in her throat. No matter how many times she came here, it never got easier. The little girl knelt down, running her fingers over the cool stone. "Hi, Papa," she said softly. "I miss you." Tears welled up in her mother's eyes, but she blinked them away. She knelt beside her daughter, placing a hand on her shoulder. "He loved you so much," she whispered. "I know," the girl replied, but there was something else in her voice, something unspoken. Then out of nowhere, the little girl said something that sent a chill down her mother's spine. "Papa came home last night." The mother froze. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she had heard her daughter correctly. What did you say?" The little girl turned to look at her, her expression calm, almost too calm. "He was standing in my room. He smiled at me." A cold shiver ran down the mother's back. "Sweetheart, Papa is in heaven," she said carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. The little girl nodded. "I know, but he was there. He told me to tell you something." The mother swallowed hard. "Tell me what?" The little girl leaned in, as if sharing a secret. "He said, I'm coming home soon." The world seemed to stop for a moment. The wind died down. The rustling leaves stilled, and the mother felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not just sadness, not just grief. Something much, much colder. And then, just as suddenly as the moment had arrived, the little girl stood up, dusted off her dress, and took her mother's hand. "Come on, Mama, let's go home." The mother nodded slowly, still trying to shake the unease that had settled deep in her bones. But as they walked back to the car, she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. And that was when she saw it. A single footprint. Fresh, right beside the grave. As if someone had been standing there, watching. The mother tried to brush off the eerie feeling creeping over her, convincing herself it was just her imagination. The fresh footprint must have been from another visitor, someone who had passed by earlier. That had to be it. But no matter how much she reasoned with herself, something about it felt wrong. The ride home was just as quiet as the trip to the cemetery. The little girl hummed softly to herself in the back seat, her fingers gently tapping against the window. The mother glanced at her through the rearview mirror, watching her expression. She looked content, peaceful even, as if she wasn't at all disturbed by what she had said at the grave. When they arrived home, the mother locked the front door behind them and took a deep breath. Maybe a warm meal and a good night's rest would ease her nerves. Go wash up, sweetheart. I'll make you some dinner, she said, forcing a smile. The little girl nodded and skipped off to her room. But the mother lingered in the hallway for a moment, staring at the closed door. The words from the cemetery echoed in her mind. He said, "I'm coming home soon." Shaking her head, she went into the kitchen and started preparing dinner. The sound of the knife hitting the cutting board was steady, rhythmic. It gave her something to focus on, something to ground her. But just as she was beginning to calm down, she heard something. A faint creak from the hallway. Her body tensed. "Sweetheart," she called, wiping her hands on a towel. No answer. She stepped cautiously out of the kitchen and peered down the hallway. The little girl's bedroom door was slightly open, just as she had left it. But something about the air felt different. Heavier. Slowly, she walked toward the room, pushing the door open a little more. Her daughter was sitting on her bed, staring at the closet. The mother's heart skipped a beat. "What are you doing?" she asked, keeping her voice gentle. The little girl didn't look at her. She just pointed. "He's inside." A chill ran down the mother's spine. She followed her daughter's gaze, her breath catching in her throat. The closet door was closed, but something about it felt off, like it was waiting to be opened. She forced a small laugh, trying to shake the unease. "Sweetheart, there's nothing in there. It's just your clothes." The little girl finally turned to look at her, her expression serious. "No, Mama. He's inside. He's waiting for you." The mother's hands trembled as she reached for the closet door. She hesitated for a moment, her pulse pounding in her ears. Then, in one quick motion, she pulled it open. Empty. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and turned back to her daughter. See, nothing there. But the little girl just smiled. "Not right now," she said softly. That night, the mother couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in her head. Her daughter's words. The footprint at the grave. The way the air in the house felt. Different. Around midnight, she finally drifted off, exhaustion taking over. But she didn't sleep peacefully. Somewhere in the house, the floorboards creaked. The mother stirred slightly but didn't wake. Then a soft whisper floated through the air. A voice she hadn't heard in a long time. "I'm home." The bedroom door slowly creaked open, and in the darkness, a shadow stepped inside. The mother's eyes fluttered open, a strange sensation creeping over her. She wasn't sure what had woken her, but the air in the room felt different, colder. Heavy silence filled the space, but something wasn't right. She turned her head slightly, her heart pounding. The bedroom door was open. She was sure she had closed it before going to bed. A sharp chill ran through her body as she sat up slowly. The darkness in the hallway seemed deeper than usual, as if it were swallowing the light from the nightstand lamp. She strained her ears, listening, and then she heard it. Soft footsteps. Coming from the hallway. Her breath caught in her throat. For a brief, terrifying moment, she couldn't move. She could barely think. But then, instinct kicked in. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she unlocked the screen. But before she could call anyone, a small voice made her freeze. "Mama." Her daughter. The mother turned to see the little girl standing in the doorway, her tiny frame outlined in the dim glow of the hallway light. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. "He's here," the little girl whispered. The mother swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. "Sweetheart, who?" The girl took a small step forward, glancing over her shoulder. "Papa," she said softly. "He's home." A shiver ran through the mother's entire body. "Baby," she whispered, choosing her words carefully. "Papa, he's not." Before she could finish, the hallway light flickered. And then a shadow moved. Not the little girls. Something taller. Something standing just behind her. The mother's breath hitched. For a split second, she could see it. Broad shoulders, familiar posture, a presence she hadn't felt in so long. It looked like him. It felt like him. But deep inside, something told her it wasn't. Summoning every ounce of courage, she grabbed her daughter's hand and pulled her into the room, shutting the door behind them. She pressed her back against it, heart racing. "Listen to me," she said, keeping her voice calm despite the terror rising in her chest. "Papa loves us, but he's not here anymore. Do you understand?" The little girl looked up at her, something unreadable in her eyes. But he said he was coming home. The mother took a shaky breath, gripping her daughter's shoulders. "I need you to be strong, okay? No matter what happens, stay with me." Then the doorknob rattled. The mother's grip on her daughter tightened. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. And then a voice. Soft, familiar. "Let me in." Tears burned in the mother's eyes. She shook her head, whispering, "No, you're not real." The voice came again, more insistent this time. "It's me. Please, open the door." A lump formed in her throat. No, it wasn't him. It couldn't be. She squeezed her eyes shut, gripping her daughter close. "You need to leave," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. Silence. And then the footsteps retreated. The air in the room lightened. The heaviness, the cold, it all started to fade. The mother held her daughter for a long time, neither of them speaking, until finally exhaustion took over. At some point, they both drifted into sleep. By morning, the house felt normal again. The mother cautiously opened the door, peering into the hallway. It was empty. No shadows, no footprints, just stillness. Later that day, she and her daughter returned to the cemetery. The mother knelt beside the grave, pressing her palm against the stone. "I love you," she whispered, "but you need to rest now." The little girl knelt beside her, placing a small flower at the base of the headstone. "Goodbye, Papa," she murmured. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the sound of rustling leaves. For the first time in a long while, the mother felt peace. A warmth filled her chest, like a quiet reassurance. As they walked away, the little girl reached for her mother's hand, looking up at her with a small smile. "I think he's happy now." The mother squeezed her hand gently, nodding. "I think so too." And with that, they left, knowing that some goodbyes were necessary, and some spirits were finally at rest.